Hey, welcome everybody. Listen, we are going to have a really, really outstanding program today. Welcome on this fine Monday, and I'm sure you already heard about it, but my book is finally out, Marking the Masses, and I know many of you already received those. And listen, it's a great book. It even surprised me how good it was. But I encourage you to get it if you want to. You're going to be very well informed on what is happening now, where things are going, the mark of the beast, and answer a whole lot of questions in there for you, and even the hows. You know, what are you supposed to do right now? So you can check that book out at hopefortimes.com or on the app. And let me tell you, we have an absolutely, as I mentioned, a terrific program today. You're going to be super blessed. My first time guest ever that's on with us today is Patrick Wood. Patrick, thank you for joining me. Man, this is wonderful.
Yes, my pleasure. It's really good to be with you because this is a topic that needs to be explored more from a Christian biblical point of view, truly.
Yeah. And just so you all know, Patrick is an expert on technocracy. And we're going to look at technocracy in just a minute. I'm going to have him define it for you. And as he himself said, he is the oldest living person that knows about technocracy. Or what was it you said, Pat? Somebody said about you. You didn't say it about yourself.
I know. It's the oldest living expert. That's how I was introduced one time on a podcast. I didn't know whether to take it as a good thing or a bad thing.
Take it as a good thing. Yeah. I'm looking really forward to this program today. So we're just going to start right in this, and you can connect with Patrick at technocracy.news. You can check out the link. It's there in the description. Well, I want to welcome everybody on the app, on the website, on Roku, on Facebook, and also on YouTube for joining us. All right, first question. You wrote an article recently called, the title of it is The Great Debanking, Global, Draconian, and Devastating. And then you say, as I wrote in my book, which is this book here, on the evil twins of technocracy and transhumanism. I'll ask you about that in a few more minutes, but you referenced that. In it, you said the global banking cartel has risen to the surface as the real driver of globalization, technocracy, and the Great Reset. In 1973, commercial banks populated the ranks of organizations like the Trilateral Commission. In 2023, they have been replaced by the central banks themselves. Patrick, can you go into this a little bit more? The great debanking, global, draconian, and devastating.
Yes. I've followed the global banking industry for all of my career, really going back to the mid-'70s. And when I wrote Trilaterals over Washington with the late Anthony Sutton, who was from Stanford University, we did a network analysis of the membership of the Trilateral Commission that was published in my book, or the book we co-authored called Trilaterals over Washington. And we discovered through this network analysis that there was a heavy concentration of commercial banks like the Citigroup and like Chase Manhattan and so on that were part of Bank of America, another one, part of the membership of the Trilateral Commission. And that wasn't totally shocking to us, I don't think, but it was confirming what we already felt. And then I decided when I wrote this new book, The Evil Twins, that I would do the same network analysis that we did back then. We didn't have computers back then, so it was all by hand. And I kind of had to do it that way again. But, you know, I took the entire membership list of the Trilateral Commission and broke it up into categories and kind of put people in different buckets and stuff. And then I went through and I analyzed, okay, where are the concentrations, where is it seemingly power? And I was really surprised to find that the commercial banks had been minimized in membership representation within the ranks of the Trilateral Commission. And conversely, all of a sudden, there was a large percentage of the banking group from central banks themselves. And this was another confirmation to me. It did surprise me, but it was a confirmation that the central bank system, the network of central banks in the world, is rising to their, I don't know what to call it. I won't say their rightful place because they don't have any rightful place, but they've risen to the cream area to exercise the power that they probably always had. And what's happening in the banking system now is that those who are bucking the system are being squeezed out like the last bit of toothpaste in a tube of toothpaste in your bathroom. And this is becoming obvious now. People like Dr. Joseph Mercola, who is arguably the largest alternative medicine supplement site in the world. At one time, a few years ago, he had 30 million visitors a month. Can you imagine?
Wow.
Huge operation. JP Morgan Chase simply terminated his bank accounts, telling him to get lost. You're out, dude. And not only did they cancel his commercial account, they canceled him personally. They canceled his CFO, his CEO, and their family members as well.
Wow.
Just boom, all across the board. It kind of is reminiscent to the threats that the mob made probably at one time, or, we probably see some terminology like this even in the Bible. When an enemy comes and says, I'm going to get you, or you cross me, I'm going to get you. And if you cross me, I'm going to kill you, your family, and I'm going to burn all their houses down too. This is kind of the attitude we see with the banking industry right now. They're going after people who are troublemakers, right, to them. Mm-hmm. And then the same thing happened to Nigel Farage in the Great Britain, who is the creator of Brexit originally. His bank, which he'd been with for a long time, called NatWest, that's N-A-T West, they canceled him as well with no reason given. He said, you're not compatible with this anymore, goodbye. They didn't know who they were dealing with when they took after Nigel, by the way, but he has so many contacts. He got some emails, he got some discovery very quickly from the bank, found out, yep, it was because of his political views and Brexit and all that kind of stuff. And the CEO of NatWest actually resigned the other day in shame.
Really?
And it was a beautiful thing, in my opinion. But he raised a lot of ruckus over it. But this is debanking. Well, in Nigel's case, somebody created a Facebook group in Great Britain to ask the question, has anybody else been debanked? Like this? They have 10,000 people
who
have joined this Facebook group saying, they threw me out.
Really, 10,000 people have been debanked in
that. I mean, that they're there, and I suppose not all of them have.
Yeah,
I
but
can't
that is
make
amazing.
a count on it, but
that is amazing. So I had Maria Z from Australia on not too long ago. She's coming back again, I think, next week or the week after. She was debanked over very similar things. She's quite outspoken. Mercola, that was just last week, if I remember correctly.
Yes.
And with Mercola, I mean, what does he do? I mean, what do you do at that point?
Well, I'm sure he's going to have a fallback position because he's been expecting this kind of thing for a long time. And actually, it happened to him once before, but it wasn't like so broad. Maybe the reason they did it so broadly this time was to make sure he gets the message. Mm-hmm. But I'm sure he has some fallback position. I don't know what it is. I haven't talked to him since, but he's a smart guy. He knows what he's doing, and he's had a lot of hassle from the establishment ever since. Especially since COVID started. And I have to say, Mercola is not he's not arch conservative by any stretch of the imagination. He's been a fairly socially liberal guy. I like him a lot, by the way. He's a great guy. So don't take it wrong. I'm not really criticizing. I'm just pointing out he's not part of the radical right, where you expect all this to happen, like to Nigel or to some other talk show host or something. But because of his message, this is the issue. The message is the issue, not the person, not really the person's political ideology either, whether it's left or right or in the middle or Christian, non-Christian. It's not so much that, but it's, it's the other things, the message that they're communicating. If it goes against their narrative, whatever that is, and we talk about that, but if they go against their globalist narrative, they may well be canceled and just sort of wiped off the face of the map.
Yeah, even Joe Rogan has faced some pushback. He's definitely was never known in the past to be conservative by any stretch of the imagination. Right. So they don't want this message out there, and there's a narrative that they really want to control. And
Yes.
okay, when
Yeah.
we look at the banking, I wasn't going to get into this, but the reality of it is that, Patrick, we keep hearing about an economic catastrophe. I think there are certain things that are intentional. When you look at Silicon Valley Bank, what happened there, they get the bailout from the government. You take a small bank in the middle of the country, they're not going to get a bailout from the country. It appears to me that they can deliberately collapse a bank, but at the same time, you just have a bank like Silicon Valley Bank that had really bad policies. They did hire some of the worst people for that business. I mean, I've read online their hiring policies. Basically, if you are woke, they would hire you. Didn't matter about your education.
Yeah.
So they've set up a system that failure will happen, and failure is going to happen to enough banks. We have things that are put in place that are going to just have really bad repercussions. How much money can you keep printing before you have a collapse? Before you have a Weimar effect or something like that. So we have this. So it appears to me these things are intentional, and then you create an environment where crises will happen. It has to happen, and then you have a takeover. Do you see something like that?
There are some very evil players in the banking world, I have to say, and these are the kind of people who, if they can't get something to happen just right, they have no problem precipitating a crisis. This has happened many times over history, not just looking back the last 2 or 3 years. There have been multiple major tectonic type consolidations in the banking industry, for instance, going all the way back to the 70s. I remember, in 1973 and 4, there's a huge consolidation. Bunches of local banks went out of business. We had it in 1988. We had it in 2008. In the year 2002, there's a giant shakeout. This is going to happen again. And there's not that many remaining banks at this point that are kind of not part of the big cartel. And so what you're going to end up with is, a few major, like in the media, you're going to end up with a few major banking companies that will kind of control everything. But those will be the companies that answer to the central banks directly. They will be part of that mechanism. The other thing that's really important to know here, most people have glossed over it, is that the central bank digital currencies are being designed intentionally to have a retail feature where people will be able to open an account directly with the central bank and deposit money in the central bank and cycle money through it electronically, put deposits in, spend it, etc., just like you do in your Wells Fargo account, your Bank of America account, or whatever. And if you think about it for just a minute, the danger in this is that the central banks are in a position to take over the monetary system entirely and force all of the other banks out of business. What bank in the world, I'm sure you got local banks in your area that, are kind of smallish and they serve the community where you live, might be a savings and loan or whatever, but what bank or S&L can compete with the Federal Reserve? Anybody in their right mind that would think about it would say, where would my money be safer? In little podunk bank or at the Federal Reserve? Hardly anybody has recognized this and much less squawking about it. They should be. Because if this happens, if they keep this plan going forward, this will take the creation of monetary policy and money out of the hands of Congress, where constitutionally it resides right now. And it will take it away from the Treasury as well, which has delegated powers from Congress to regulate the currency of the country. And it will give it directly to the central bank, which is not part of the government at all. It's a private institution that serves the member banks, its member banks, that is. So anyway, we're headed down a slippery slope on this whole monetary thing right now. There's going to be a huge consolidation shakeout coming up.
I don't see anything that's going to stop it.
I don't either.
Yeah, there's DeSantis said this isn't going to happen. If he's elected president, I don't think this can be stopped. I don't care who's president, it can't be stopped. When you see how long, apart from something like the rapture, because the rapture will be a game changer. You know, if it happens next week, things can be sped up rapidly. 2 Thessalonians chapter 2 talks about the restrainer being removed as believers who push against certain things and hold back certain things. We are a restraining force that is used by the Lord. So you remove the restrainer, then things can move along quite rapidly. So apart from the rapture taking place, how long do you think it would take this world, I'll say the Western world, to get to a place of something like a digital currency?
If you match up the progress to what's been happening with AI, the artificial intelligence, and in particular with the quest for general artificial intelligence, these are all going to merge at some point in time, and the result will be the curve going vertical to consolidate everything into a single entity. That's kind of hard to describe and develop in a short period of time, I realize, but people should be watching what's going on with artificial intelligence today, how it's impacting the world, how it's taking over different industries and displacing people and procedures and policies, et cetera. But if we could graph the progress of the monetary system, which we could, and if we could graph the progress of the artificial intelligence industry, we'd find that the curve in the AI industry is much, 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 much steeper than it is in these other industries. So we could extrapolate and say, well, okay, and the monetary system is going this way, and the economic system is going this way, and we could kind of make a trend line and try and figure out, okay, we're here, we're going to be here in 5 years, 2 years, 10 years, whatever it might be. We could kind of have that discussion, right? Mm-hmm. But when you add in the trajectory of artificial intelligence and the impact it's having on the world and on humanity in general, and I say humanity, I mean people, individual people, pretty much all bets are off. It's an unknown. I'm just going to say it's an unknown. Even the people in the industry, in the AI industry, are unable to predict where AI is going, even in the next 12 months. They just can't. They're at a loss to do it. And some of them have just expressed that. Say, we just don't know. We should know, but we don't know. We can't. It's moving so fast, we can't do it anymore.
Well, this takes me to this book, The Evil Twins of Technocracy and Transhumanism. And I got to ask you some things, because most of this that is in here, it's new to the world, at least to the non-tech world. You can go back decades and you can find out, these things were coming. In fact, my new book talks about these things coming. My dad was involved in the beginning stages back in 1960. But with that, let's go into some areas. I'm going to have you define some things. I want to ask you about some things that you have in here also: technocracy, restructuring civilization, the science of social engineering, who's driving this train. You have a lot of things in here that I got to ask you about. But before we get to any of those, can you define what technocracy is?
I can. Yeah, very, very succinctly. I've done it a million times, and I keep I keep refining my talking points because it's so important. First off, technocracy is an economic system. It's not a political system. It's an economic system. It started out as an economic system back in the 1930s when it was created at Columbia University, and it is still an economic system today. We know it today on a global basis, according to the term sustainable development, which is an economic system, not a political system. It's about control over resources and consumption throughout the world. This is what technocracy was back in the 30s. So in fact, they were so strongly oriented towards these are engineers and scientists that came up with this cockeyed idea. They were so certain that their science was right that there was no need for political discourse. Therefore, they wanted to get rid of the political system altogether. They wanted to send Congress home, tell them take a hike, and all other elected bodies where people could have civic discourse and stuff and hash things out. Well, where do we want to go with this? They say, you don't need that. We have the science. Just listen to us. Just do what we say, man. Everything will be great. So here's
Trust the science.
is that reminiscent of Anthony Fauci?
Oh, yeah.
It is.
Yes, it is.
Yes, it is. Okay. Well, here's how technocracy defined itself by 1937, at least, in a magazine they had called, very creative, called the Technocrat, right? The magazine. Here's what they defined themselves as. It said, technocracy is the science of social engineering, the scientific operation of the entire social mechanism to produce and distribute goods and services to the entire population.
Wow.
It goes on and says, there will be no place for politics, politicians, finance, or financiers, rackettes or racketeers. Technocracy will distribute by means of a certificate of distribution available to every citizen from birth to death.
Wow.
That's what I call a pregnant definition. It's like there's so many things to unpack in it.
Well, that explains why we are experiencing everything that we are experiencing.
Yeah.
I mean, you could put everything into that. Agenda 2030, you already mentioned the SDGs, but you can put every single thing in there, AI being a tool to bring this about and enforce things. Social, the narrative, you know, I was watching Victor Davis Hanson the other day, and he said, hey, how powerful the narrative, regardless of whether or not it's true.
Yes, that's
the
right.
narrative is powerful even if it's a lie.
Yes. Let me explain the problem that these engineers and scientists faced back then. They thought that capitalism was going to die because of the Great Depression. That was their starting point. So the brainiacs at Columbia got together and said, we can build an economic system from scratch. And engineers and scientists, they build things, right? They make things. Somebody comes up with an idea, somebody else says, hey, let's make a requirements analysis, let's figure out what they got to do to get it done, and then they're off to the races, right? This is the way scientists and engineers work. Well, the whole concept of technocracy coming from that group especially is totally mechanistic. It was totally mechanistic. It was like, well, humanity is just a machine after all. And, people are like machines. That was the era of Pavlov's dogs and B.F. Skinner, et cetera. They're just like a machine, basically. And society was viewed as a machine that could be controlled mechanistically, like a factory floor. Well, building a factory to an engineer is nothing. You have belts and pulleys and gears and motors and oil cans and whatever. And if something goes wrong in the factory, well, you go down and you squirt the oil and things, fix the belt and things go on. But the problem with building mechanistic factories and mechanistic cities and mechanistic urban dwellings, et cetera, was that all of those non-living things were easy to control. They were easy to specify and control. The problem was the people you put into those systems to work, because factories need people to operate. Duh, right? Of course they do. They need people. Well, not anymore. They just need robots. But back then they needed people.
Back then.
Here's the problem. The problem is people don't do what you say, right? Okay, you walk in a new job, they say, well, this is your thing. You're going to go over there and count these things. I don't want to count those things. I don't count well anyway. I only got 4 fingers on my right hand.
Don't show up for work.
And they don't show up for work, and everything gets messed up. That's why they put this statement at the top of their definition. Technocracy is the science of social engineering.
Wow.
Because people need to be engineered to fit into their engineered system to operate with maximum efficiency.
So this describes why, or defines why, you have Yuval Noah Harari saying what he says and basically wanting everybody to have some kind of implant in them that they can control the masses of the people to serve the elites.
Yes.
And with the promise, like the light in the Garden of Eden, you will be like gods. We will be like gods, and you'll never die. Well, they're creating this whole thing because we see the social engineering take place, which I believe the last 3.5 years has been all about social engineering.
Yeah, wow. It really has. There's a very important biblical distinction to make here, if I might.
Please do.
And that is, from the Christian perspective, Christians very clearly in the Bible, Christians are controlled by the Holy Spirit from the inside. This is the natural process of being a Christian, right? You're controlled from the inside, your heart, your mind, by the presence of the Holy Spirit in your life. Any church, of course, that ever got into trying to control Christians from the outside ended up in disaster eventually, because that doesn't work. It's the Holy Spirit that gives marching orders, or whatever you want to call it, lifestyle instructions, etc., from the inside out. During the tribulation that we know is coming, the devil does not have that latitude to control anybody from the inside, unless, of course, maybe they're demon possessed. But generally, for all humanity, cannot control people from the inside. But he's the great imitator. Nevertheless, he wants to imitate anything God does. He wants to imitate it. The structure that's being built here to control people from the outside, right? Not the inside, but from the outside, this controls, this exoskeleton, if you will, of social control. This is essential to the events, I believe, that are going to take place during the tribulation. But we see this happening there. We see this external control, the social credit scoring system, the nudging, the forcing people to do certain things, to stay in certain channels, like when you're debanked or whatever. Okay, don't do that anymore. Stay in your lane. We see this increasing in every industry, every conceivable area that we could have a discussion about. You see this kind of external control closing in on manipulating behavior of people, to the extent where when you become a roboton, so to speak, not being a Christian, I mean, you become a roboton, you look like you're being controlled from the inside because you're making decisions and coming to rationalizations, whatever, that agree with what they're trying to get you to do. It looks like it's coming from the inside, but it's all coming from outside control. Does that make sense?
Totally. It totally makes sense, and it explains so many things that are happening. So you go back to Agenda 2030 and SDGs.
Yes.
What do you have? You have the Sustainable Development Goals to control the masses of the people. And as long as you go along with them, your social credit will be good. Mm-hmm. If your ESG score, whatever you want to call it, it's going to be good. So that's what is taking place. And you just look at the last 3.5 years. It was social engineering. You're not going to be able to buy and sell. You're not going to be able to go to this store. You can only go to these stores. Close the churches. Amazing, isn't it, Patrick, how many pastors willingly, there's two things that happened, closed their churches and took the government's money, which I personally think, that once you take the government's money to operate a church, in your mind, you're going to have a really hard time overcoming not doing what the government tells you to do. But I'm kind of opinionated on that. So I'm not here to talk about my opinions right now.
Gotcha.
So let me ask you this. You have a chapter in your book. Again, the book is titled The Evil Twins of Technocracy and Transhumanism. One of the chapters is, who's driving this train? You mentioned BlackRock. A couple of other things. Who's driving this train?
The end of it, the most important group, and there's many layers to this. It's like the proverbial artichoke. Or onion. There's several layers to this, this train. But when you get to the white hot core of it, to my surprise, as I mentioned earlier, the central banks now are the major players. They're the ones that are driving, I believe they're the ones that are driving the train on a global basis right now. Policies coming down from them are filtering down through the banking system, not only the banking system, but filtering down into like the World Economic Forum, the United Nations, and other large globalist bodies and stuff. This is the source of this. And of course, it concerns money. The Bank for International Settlements is the so-called central bank to central banks. They control the whole shooting match of the whole network of central banks from the top down. And every country only has one central bank. You never find a country with two. It's always one. But the central bank only has one client, and that happens to be the host country. So they only lend money to one entity, like the Federal Reserve only lends money to the U.S. government, and the same thing in Germany, same thing in Switzerland, et cetera. They only have one customer. Normally, they don't have cross, like the Fed doesn't normally lend to Switzerland, but it might happen. So the central banks have this very intricate network that reaches down into society at levels that you'd never expect. And I think that was the analysis I did, that like we did back in the 1970s, that kind of brought this to light, that yes, the central banks have power. Then when I started looking at the central banks, what are they doing? What about how does central bank digital currencies work? Who's orchestrating those? Who's setting up these new technical laboratories around the world to get digital currencies cooking? It's the BIS, and the BIS is cooking from the top down.
How much power does Larry Fink of BlackRock have, and wield?
Yeah. In a practical sense, he has a lot of influence and power. He certainly does. Not only jawbone power, but also just by the number of companies that he has represented in the company portfolio. There's many directors of public companies and so on that BlackRock invests in that have an overlap with each other and also with BlackRock. So he has a tremendous amount of influence. But I personally would not make the mistake to think, well, Larry Fink is the god of economics or the god of corporate world. No, he's not. As a matter of fact, he's an operator. It pales in comparison to the power contained in like the Bank for International Settlements. Klaus Schwab is another one we need to be careful with. Saying that Klaus Schwab is like Dr. No or Dr. Evil or whoever it might be, like that. Yeah. That it fits, but Klaus Schwab is an academic. Academics do not drive the train. They're not running the train. They're not driving the train. This is demonstratable. In fact, I demonstrate it in that chapter. They're important. I'm not saying they're not important, but they also are operators in this whole system, taking orders from someone else. And where that someone else is, you look above it, you find, well, yes, it's the central bank system of the world that has the real teeth. We're finding out now they have iron teeth.
Daniel chapter 7, huge iron teeth, the fourth beast that the 10 horns come out of. So exactly the Bank of International Settlements. All right, so there's got to be, who's at the, do we know who's at the top, who's on the board there? Are they known people that are players? For example,
yes.
Okay, go ahead.
They're all discoverable, absolutely. The heads of each individual central bank have a membership or a seat at the table as directors at the BIS in Basel, Switzerland. They're supposed to go once a quarter in person to Basel to have a roundtable, whatever you want to call it, attitude adjustment maybe, I don't know. But they're supposed to go once a quarter. I'm not sure they all do, but I'm sure the core, kind of the key players in the BIS probably be there. But they go and they talk about policy, and they receive policy from higher up. The current head of the BIS, the general manager or managing director, is a man, Agustin Carstens from Mexico. He was the head of the Central Bank of Mexico for a number of years. And he was selected to be the head of the BIS. But the whole network together, pretty much the heads of each individual central bank pretty much are the board of directors for the BIS. And they make the policy decisions, then they take them back to the countries, and they give everybody else marching orders from there.
And everything gets, all the implementation of whatever they decide. So these people are basically deciding the direction that things are going to go.
Yes, exactly right. They're creating the narrative. They're the ones creating the narrative.
Create the narrative. Wow.
That's right. Klaus Schwab wrote a book about that. It's called The Great Narrative, right?
Yes, he did. I think it was after he wrote the Great Reset, which I have right over there.
Yes.
So, looking at these people, I think Larry Fink, I've seen him in a video many times, same video, on a talk show, said we have to we have to change the behaviors, meaning social engineering.
That's right.
So
Class A1 technocrat speaking there.
yeah, he's part of this system. I remember seeing who's now King Charles. It was at the COP26 meeting, and if I remember correctly, some people said, "Hey, it was he didn't really say that. It was different words were put in." But I watched it over and over and did my best to read his lips, and it appeared that Charles said he has trillions at his disposal. And he was talking about climate and power, and he said and it was just so weird. Many people caught that. But you look at that, and there's obviously what you just described with the BIS and these different players who make decisions to go and implement everything. You go, there has to be, we know, an antichrist that's going to come. We know there's going to be a 10-king system. However that works out, there's different opinions on how that's going to work out. It will have huge iron teeth. It will go about, as Revelation chapter 6 says, with the rider on the white horse, conquering and to conquer. It's going to be very oppressive, but it will control the masses. It will be, I believe, how you described social engineering and technocracy. That's the rider on the white horse. That's the way it's going to be done.
I would also probably like to throw into the mix here. I'm sure most of your listeners have some idea of who Dr. Francis Schaeffer was.
Oh, yeah.
The last century. He produced a series of 10 videos. They were documentary style videos, 30 minutes each, called How Should We Then Live? And it was, it kind of would follow along with his book and so on, but it's brilliant stuff, in my opinion. In his last video, his 10th video, he gave his prognostication for the future. Now, this was in the late 70s. He said, this is the way the whole thing is pointed right now. And one of the things that was shocking, I had to go back and listen to this again. I'd had a recollection of it. So I'm going to go listen to it again. He said in that last video, towards the end of it, he said, these are the only possible outcomes where we're going to end up in a postmodern world. And he gave a couple of options. And the last option he gave was that a technocratic elite will rise up to take control of the whole system. And it will run it in a totally autocratic scientific dictatorship manner. This is exactly where we are. His statement back then, his analysis was totally prescient. And I would even suggest to people to go back and listen to those 10 videos just to find out how he got to that point.
Francis Schaeffer's was absolutely fantastic. How would you define autocratic?
Autocrat meaning, sorry, my printer just took off here. I had to turn it off. So, well, autocrats, and let me answer it this way. Technocracy is it's a totalitarian type of a system. In other words, one size fits all, and everybody has to do what we say. Autocrats that carry out those policies enforce it that way. They don't necessarily come up with the ideas, but they enforce it that way.
They're going to be the enforcers.
During COVID, you had the people at the top, the Anthony Fauci's and so on, that were dictating from the top down what policy would be. And of course, Fauci had people above him at the World Health Organization and others that were kind of creating the narrative from the top down. But Fauci picked it up in the U.S., dished it out to how many counties are in the United States. I don't know how many counties are there. There's 50 states, obviously, but there are, a couple thousand counties, 2,500, I don't know, whatever it is. This all filtered down to every county and every city in America. And boy, you found out in a country minute who was a wannabe dictator and who wasn't a wannabe dictator.
Yes, you did.
Oh man, these people that you might have thought, I thought they were great guys, great gals, and all of a sudden, man, they're just, the vampire, like the vampire fangs come out, at midnight. All of a sudden, they're like vicious, like you do what I say or else. These are autocrats.
Yeah, I better be careful on that definition. I would have offended a whole lot of people, but basically people without the Lord, being the Lord of their life, are going to, they're going to want to be, they're going to give into things of the flesh. And one of them is power and control, be in charge. They weren't able to be famous, you know. They never made the fame, but they can become an important person. People want to be, they want to be the important person. And so it just feeds into the flesh of man.
Yes.
Okay.
Exactly.
You have another chapter in here, the one world religion emerges. All tied in with this?
This is kind of complicated. What we used to think about the one world religion, and I have a lot of friends that I have had discussions for years with, like people like like Alex, for instance, people like Carl Teichrob, wrote The Game of Gods, and there's been so many different religious movements, and people have looked at these religious systems saying, could this be it? Could the global religious system be Catholicism? Is the Pope involved? And, is it the World Council of Churches? And while all of this standard stuff is discussed and whatever, there's, in terms of AI, in terms of big tech and high tech, there's a new religion that's emerging on the world right now, and it's very, very centered on artificial intelligence. There's kind of some deep theories behind it. I wouldn't want to spring it on the listeners here because it might blow their mind right away. But the new type of religion has to do with data. A belief that the universe really is nothing more than just flows of data. And to a technocrat, data is gold. It's the holy grail. Data. How much data do you want? Just a little bit more. There's never enough data. You find data is training AI systems nilly-willy throughout the world. You find data is funding the Internet of Things and control over digital twinning technology in cities and in people and so on. Data, 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 data. Their belief is if they can get enough data pumped into the AI, why you can turn around and exercise that data to control the objects from which it came. This is now a universal concept to a lot of these people, where they're looking at the entire universe. People like Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos, and so on, they're trying to get into space and colonize Mars. They're looking at the universe really as just a data flow. If we knew more about it, we could control it. This has been the driving force of both transhumanism and technocracy for as long as it's been an issue. More data is necessary. That's what Yuval Harari says. More data. No, we're going to go under your skin now, right? To get more data, where we will know more about you than you know about yourself. This is turning into a religion, and AI is forcing people to adopt it as a religion, not even knowing that they're in that religion. I realize this is tough. Maybe I could just back up and explain one other thing that might help a little bit with AI. There's a documentary out right now by the guys that co-founded the Center for Humane Technology. I recommend people go there and find that video on their website, listen to it. It's very interesting. Not from a biblical point of view. It's just an interesting take on AI and what the trajectory is. But in the documentary, or their presentation, they talk about the effect of AI on humanity itself. And one of the key points, I can't even make a summary of it, but one of the key points they bring out is that reality is collapsing. Reality is collapsing. Not for everybody necessarily, but reality is collapsing. And during COVID, we saw, for instance, all the people that took a nosedive or swan dive into mass formation syndrome, where it just seemed like people went nuts, and they're driving down alone in their car and they're wearing 2 masks. What's going on, man? Are you going to get it from your cigarette lighter or something? No.
Yeah, we've seen some wild things.
And people have said this, man, why are people so crazy? Reality is collapsing. And this is really, really important because to a Christian, if a Christian is at least absorbing anything from the Bible, and I hope they do, to a Christian, we are told that we have an anchor to our soul and that we have a view of reality that is unchangeable, right? It's solid. To the rest of the world, AI is causing this phenomenon that is a collapse of reality, literally a collapse of reality where everything people look at anymore is fake. It's just fake. It's not real. There's no substance behind it. You have deep fakes now on the internet. You have programs now that can listen to 5 seconds of your voice and turn around and recreate your voice and call you up on the phone and say, whatever they want to say to you, think, trying to get information out of you. And you think, this is my kid. This is my wife I'm talking to here. And she's saying she's in jail and she needs bail and to send $5,000 right away. Reality is snapping right now for millions, hundreds of millions, if not billions of people on the planet. And every day, more people's reality is collapsing to where they have lost touch with the reality, with the real, true reality of the world. They've lost touch with it. Now they're floating free. They're floating like a ping pong ball on the ocean. No control over where they get bounced. They're not sinking, but they get driven by the wind to and fro. Brings up some biblical thoughts too. This is the condition of the world today. And because of that, because reality is collapsing over here, people are more easily manipulated and controlled. It just doesn't take much effort at all anymore. Whereas 50 years ago, if you tried to pull some of the stuff we see today on people back in the 70s, get out of here. I'm like, I'll run you out of town. Today, no problem.
Oh,
We'll accept it. We'll do it. This is the lead up to that 7-year period, I suppose, we call the tribulation. And we could ask this question, this philosophical maybe, but how much time will the devil reserve of that 7-year period, knowing his time is short at that point? How much time would he reserve for building his infrastructure? There's only one answer to that, by the way. It's not a trick question. None of it. None of it. If he's only got 7 years, he better have his ducks lined up in a row on day one, because he's not going to spend time building infrastructure at that point. If you follow what I'm saying.
I follow you. Hence, why we are experiencing what we are experiencing.
This is the infrastructure that we're going to deal, that the world will deal with, not us, but this is the infrastructure that the world will have to deal with when the Antichrist does appear and the tribulation starts, the time clock starts ticking. And right now we see people tipping into this, falling into it daily. And it's so sad because, as our mandate as Christians is give an answer to every person who asks of the hope that's within us. My guess is 99 out of 100 Christians have no clue yet. They will, but they have no clue previously about what we're talking about here, the condition of the world. And AI is driving this mass exodus out of reality into fantasy, into a world that, is totally different than what we've ever seen before. It's unprecedented. But these are the people that we are supposed to take the gospel to. Okay? We need to get through that screen and talk to them and explain to them why we believe, and why we would encourage them to come and believe the same thing. But when somebody has lost touch with reality, you know what? It's like talking to a brick wall. It's like talking to a brick. In one ear, picks up speed, goes out the other side. It's really sad. I mean, it's very disturbing.
It is. Well, it explains why we see, everything you said explains why we see in the Western world this claim that men aren't really men and women aren't really he, she, who, what, when, all these the different pronouns, the different genders, the absurdity of it all.
Yes.
You can see this non-reality. People are being more and more confused. And all of this, I believe, is intentional, driven by Satan himself, through his minions here, through the schools, because he knows he doesn't have much time left. And I really love how you just put that into the right perspective. How much time is he going to reserve to set up his infrastructure? Zero. It has to be in place. And we also know that because the 10 kings give him the power. He becomes the anointed one. So these things must be in place. Hence, we are experiencing all of this. Patrick, there's so many, I had like 1,000 other questions. So I'm looking forward to having you back on. I mean, I'm listed here. I have them in your book. And I would encourage you to get Patrick's book, get mine too. But Patrick's book, The Evil Twins of Technology, Technocracy and Transhumanism. We didn't get to transhumanism. We didn't get to much of anything that all these other things I wanted to. But, you know, you talked a lot about the Lord. And the Lord is our only hope. He was going to be able to give us the truth, to wake people up by the ministry of His Word and His Holy Spirit. What would be your closing words of hope for everybody watching?
The only source of reality, and this is not just because we believe it, okay? Because I heard it in the Bible, I read it in the Bible. It's not because of that. There's only one reality and one source of reality in the universe, period. Whether you believe it or not is immaterial. That's God. He set the reality of the universe. He's the only source of reality, and he's the only one we can appeal to understand reality in the end. If there's a warning, I suppose, or encouragement, it would be understand that while the rest of the world's reality is collapsing on a one-by-one basis and on a mass basis, while their reality is collapsing and they're losing touch, they're breaking with reality. By the way, psychiatrists call that schizophrenia. As they're breaking with reality, we are the containers, we are the custodians of true reality. Hang on to that. Hang on to it. You may not understand a word we said otherwise today, but hang on to that reality, because brother or sister, the devil wants to break you out of reality too, and have you, push you into that other, fantasy world. Don't buy it. Don't buy it. Don't fall for it.
Amen. Thank you so much for joining us today, Patrick, and thank you, all of you, for joining us today. We are out of time for today, but thank you, everybody. God bless you all. Looking forward to having tomorrow with you also, Tuesday. And Patrick, I'm looking forward to having you back on here as soon as possible.